That Secretary of State Hillary Clinton 3 years ago said it was time for a fresh start with Russia. Take a listen.
We want to reset our relationship. And
let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
Lots of different opinions on that reset button. Some said, it was a cute gimmick. Others said, maybe not the right time. Since then, diplomacy is certainly something that a lot of folks have taken a closer look at. These are a few points of disagreements right now between our two countries. The U.S. continues to vocally criticize the Kremlin's backing of the Assad regime and their reported killings of thousands of their citizens. NATO's proposed missile defense system is close to the Russian border. Russia says it would be a threat to their national security. They don't want that. And there's certainly tension over Vladimir Putin's controversial return as president amid widespread reports of election fraud. With all that is happening with Russia, are we really hitting a reset with the country, or are we somehow returning back to some of these Cold War stalemates that seem still familiar? Ambassador John Bolton is with us. He's the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, also a Fox News contributor. Jonathan Schanzer is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Matt Roginski is an expert on U.S. and Russian national security at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Welcome to you all. It's a big topic, so we'll dig right into this. Matt, are we really resetting relations with Russia right now, or is that reset off the rails at this point?
I think the reset is something to think about as having passed 3 years ago. It was an opportunity where the United States said, look, let's look forward. Our interests are not that far apart, cooperating on things like Afghanistan and counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, intelligence sharing. And the Russians basically said, yeah, okay, we agree to do that. But the reality was that was 3 years ago. There's a lot of water under the bridge now. And, you don't get to hit the reset button too many times. And I think Vladimir Putin has come to the table today with a much more skeptical opinion of Obama than he had 3 years ago. He doesn't feel like this is a guy whose intentions he can necessarily trust. He thinks it's back to the bad old days of the relationship, which he basically thinks has been the dominant theme.
Ambassador Bolton, is that the only thing that's really changed in the last 3 years, the leadership of Russia, and that's what's really marked a tipping point for us?
No, I think the relations with Russia have been deteriorating for some time because they see their interest as very different from the U.S. So when the Obama administration came in and said it was going to press the reset button, you can always have better relations if you give in to the other side's position. Look, when Vladimir Putin was president last time, he said the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. That's his view. I think the view of most Americans is that the breakup of the Soviet Union was a pretty good way to end the 20th century. And so when you come at it with that vastly different worldview, nobody should be surprised that there's tension in the relationship.
Jonathan, Ambassador Bolton and I spoke last hour about an editorial in the Wall Street Journal that says what's happening as far as the European financial crisis will only further empower Russia. That was one of the arguments made by the writer. And I'm curious, just the premise of our conversation, and I'll ask all of you this, but Jonathan, your opinion on this. Do you consider Russia a threat to our national security right now?
I absolutely do. In fact, what I would argue is that Russia is the state sponsor for some of the worst state sponsors of terrorism. And I think that that is something that's been ignored by the media, not just on Syria, but also just look at the Iranian nuclear program. That's probably the greatest threat that we face today. The mullahs getting a nuclear weapon, and the Russians have been helping them further that project along, and also providing them with missiles and other means to defend themselves if and when it comes time for an invasion of Iran. And so Russia, I think, has really been at odds with our national interests on the national security front for some time now.
Well, the question becomes, what do you do, Matt? And I'm curious, again, going back to that, do you consider Russia a national security threat? And at this moment, based on the description that you've all given, which has been skeptical at best, probably more negative than I even thought going into this conversation, do you think this relationship with Russia right now is somehow beyond repair?
Look, I think we're at a very difficult spot with the Russians right now, but the reality, if we take a broader look at the relationship, is that we're still cooperating on a lot of important stuff. It tends to be most effective, to be quite frank, between Moscow and Washington when it's below the radar. And I mean by that intelligence sharing, counterterrorism operations, counter-narcotics operations. Look, the simple fact is, given our relationship with Pakistan today, it's not in great shape. It's only the Northern Distribution Network, which is the Russian transit route, that lets us supply our troops in Afghanistan and ultimately get those folks safely out of Afghanistan. So I think the cooperation's got to continue, but my colleagues are exactly right. We've got some serious differences of interest. We're going to have to figure out a way to kind of compartmentalize our disagreements. Russia's not going away, and I think the problem is if we just engage in a labeling game saying that these guys are the bad guys, they're on the wrong side of all the big important international issues, you know, it sets a tone and an atmosphere where a guy like Vladimir Putin simply says, well, I don't want to work with you.
Yeah,
and he can make that choice.
And he seems like that type of character, Ambassador Bolton. So what do we do?
Well, I think in the current circumstance, Vladimir Putin, who is a tough guy, he's a former KGB agent, he projects an image of toughness. It's how he sees himself, it's how he sees his role in Russia and his country's role. And he looks at our leader and he sees weakness. He sees weakness because of the economic difficulty, which is not getting better. He sees weakness because of our declining defense budget. He sees weakness in our agreement to the New START arms control treaty and our retreat on missile defense. And I think when he sees that panorama of weakness in front of him, he decides this is the opportune moment to push Russia's agenda. And that's exactly what he's doing. The antidote to that is to press the American agenda and not compromise as preemptively as we've been doing over the past 3.5 years.
Jonathan, I want to get a final thought from you on this. Of course, we're focusing on Russia and the United States, but I wonder, and I guess you're the right person to ask about this as you're from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, if we're actually seeing this conflict that's isolated to Russia and the United States, or if it's a much bigger conflict between those who advocate democracy and those who don't. We see Russia align with Syria and Iran, and we see the United States and others on the other side. Is that what we're really seeing? Is there a bigger picture here as far as geopolitics globally that's really coming to surface?
Well, you know, I think we need to just take a look at Russia's objectives right now. It used to be that it was very ideological, that they were really trying to push a communist agenda. That's not the case right now. This looks more like a Machiavellian thing, and they're choosing allies that, and they're being very flexible about it. So they're working with Iran, they're sheltering North Korea, they're working with the Syrians, and this is a major problem. I don't necessarily see it as a Cold War, a reemergence, but certainly you're looking at Syria playing on the wrong side of major geopolitical issues, and this is something I agree with Ambassador Bolton. The idea here is not to back down, but to press our agenda further.
Nice to have you all, Jonathan, Matthew, Ambassador Bolton. Great conversation. We look forward to having you all back.